Let's look back at what has indisputably been the biggest political event of the week, actually, in terms of implications for the world. And that is, of course, the Democratic National Convention, when freedom was the watchword. I nearly wanted to go all Beyonce there and belt it out at you, but I am aware it's late. Freedom, 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 as the celebrity stardust descended on Chicago. Oprah Winfrey was there, the Obamas, ahead of what was the biggest speech of Kamala Harris's life. Well, let's assess how she did with Jim Kennedy, former advisor to Bill Clinton and former head of communications for various prominent Democrats, including Hillary Clinton and Al Gore. Hi, Jim.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Oh, so nice to have you. Thank you for joining us. I mean,
Sure.
you heard there kind of both sides of the tightrope, right? I mean, she's saying on the one hand, on abortion, MAGA Republicans are kind of mad. But on the other hand, I'm all about freedom. And freedom is a word that certainly appeals to swing voters, people that might have voted Republican in the past as Democrats.
I'm sure that's part of the equation. You know, sometimes in politics, you get a second chance to make a first impression. And I think that's what Kamala Harris is taking advantage of is a second chance to make a first impression. And she did, quite well, I think, in the past week from the DNC perspective. I think both RNC and DNC conventions went reasonably well in terms of what they were going to accomplish. She carried that momentum through the week. And now, of course, the hard work of the final battle begins.
Well, indeed. I mean, what's been interesting to me is looking at the reaction, even just on social media, even leaving, newspapers and the like out of it. On social media, where often, typically we see the worst side of humanity, the stories that are trending from the DNC have been exactly the kind of ones that the Democrats would have wanted us to see. It's very positive, it's fun, it's joyful.
Well, yeah, and I've argued in the past myself that we need to have more kind of humility and respect in politics. Humility is not a favorite word in politics these days, but I think showing some humility goes a long way with voters, especially those in the middle who are trying to decide what to do. And respectfulness, I think, is important on both sides. It's hard to come by, of course. There's a lot of negativity all around, but I do think people are yearning for more respect. Certainly, you can disagree on and should disagree on the important issues, and hopefully that's what we see in the debate and in other campaign appearances throughout the next couple of months. But you're going to have both the high and low happening at the same time.
But I mean, this is it. I mean, she's so delicately, isn't she? Even at one point, addressing directly people watching at home who weren't intending to vote for her, emphasizing not only her support for the Palestinians, but also for defending Israel. It's constantly kind of, I'm here for everyone in the room, but also if you're watching and you're thinking about it, please do vote for me.
Yeah, I mean, she has a couple missions in mind, and both candidates do. You have to appeal to the base. You have to turn out your base of support in big numbers. But on top of that, you need to appeal to the very small number of people who could vote either way and have voted both ways in the past. And so that's the balancing act. How do you appeal to people in the middle, more moderate people, more or less, while still keeping the base alive? That's the trick for both candidates. And I think that's where the focus is going to be over the next couple of months.
Okay, so just give us an insight, because you were involved behind the scenes, as I was saying in my introduction to you, on lots of moments like this. How many drafts would Kamala Harris's speech have gone through? How hard would it have been rehearsed?
I've been involved in some of Hillary Clinton's past speeches, many drafts. There probably are three or four people involved with the candidate. And they go through, maybe a couple dozen drafts, and it gets honed right up until the last minute, I'm sure. And then, of course, it gets kind of focus grouped and tested against the polling and so forth. And then, of course, rehearsal. You have to go through the presentation because it's a combination of content and presentation, and you have to nail both. And I think both candidates did reasonably well in that regard, although arguably President Trump maybe went on too long in his remarks. Hers were shorter, which I think was smarter on her part. Of course, she hasn't done interviews yet. That's the next big thing to come along with the debate is actual media interviews, which she's avoided until now.
The other thing she's avoided, it strikes me, in that speech was talk too much about being a woman or talk too much about coming from racial minorities. She did mention those things, but she didn't massively lean into them in the same way that Hillary Clinton did talk about the glass ceiling. It feels like Kamala Harris is keen to just let those things be evident. Do you think that's the right choice?
I think so. I think it was more important for Hillary Clinton to talk about that because it was really something new and different 8 years ago, and so I think there was a rationale behind it, and certainly an historic quality to it. With that barrier having been broken, there was less of a need. It's obviously kind of obvious on the face of it, so you don't have to lean into it too much. And she also needed to kind of reintroduce or introduce herself in terms of her own personal background, aside from gender and so forth, but her own personal history. And I'm sure that was part of the equation in how she wrote the speech.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me what it does is it leaves it up to Trump to mention her identity, her gender, and her race, which is, of course, much more uncomfortable as a conversation than her mentioning it herself.
Yeah, and I would, he doesn't listen to me, but I would advise him not to focus on that and focus instead on issues. I do think there are important issues at stake in the campaign, and notably the economy and inflation and immigration. And the more that can be focused on those issues, the better for the American people. I do think the campaign commercials are going to be kind of a hidden agenda that's happening. If you live in a battleground state, you won't escape them because they're going to be wall to wall. But those commercials on both sides are going to be very important in terms of how people feel about the candidates.
That's interesting. Give us a flavour of that because, as you're pointing out, people who don't live in swing states in the States won't be seeing all of the commercials. But actually, of course, people listening here in the UK won't have seen any of them. What kind of is the diet of these ads?
That's right. Most of the money is going to go into commercials. Obviously, some of them are going to be mass market commercials. Others are going to be more targeted, such as on the internet or email or pop-up ads. So there are TikToks, et cetera. There's a variety of formats, but there are going to be a lot of TV commercials on local cable and local broadcast stations. And that's where the battle is going to, a lot of the battle is going to take place. And you can find them online. If you look on their websites, you can see those commercials are on YouTube. It's worth looking at those because those tell you a lot about which people the campaigns are targeting, who they hope to affect, and who they're trying to persuade. So a lot of thought and research is going to go into those kind of commercials.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, I saw a lot of positive coverage on social media because of the way that X as a platform now allows anyone to buy verified badges. And if you agree with Elon Musk, you're more likely to be amplified. It didn't take me long to see what MAGA Republicans were saying in response to Kamala Harris this week. And the criticism that came up, and maybe this is just a bizarre X Twitter thing, but the thing that I did keep seeing is that Harris is, and Biden is actually, a puppet of the Obamas. That appears to be an attack line. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that and what that theory comes from and whether it will have any harm to her campaign.
I'm not sure that's a valid, I'm sure that's happening. I'm not sure why it's happening. I don't think it's particularly effective. What could be more effective for Republicans is to connect Kamala Harris to the Biden administration, because the Biden administration policies are not particularly popular, and she obviously is an important part of that administration. She, on her part, I'm sure, is trying to separate herself from that. But that's the connection. If I was on the Republican side, I would choose to focus on her connection to the Biden record itself, because she can't really escape that too much.
Indeed. And I suppose her answer to those questions are going to have to be determined now, aren't they? They're going to have to be formulated now because, as you indicated earlier, she can't escape scrutiny from journalists forever. She's going to have to do a sit-down interview. She should probably do a sit-down interview with Fox News and answer those criticisms so she looks like she's prepared to. What do you think her strategy will be?
I would advise, I don't know if she will, but my advice would be to do a lot of interviews. If she puts all her eggs in one basket and has one big interview, then that's sort of a make or break moment, and too much stock is put into that. But if she does a large number of interviews over a fairly short period of time, that'll help sort of flood the zone in a way. And she does need to do that because she's obviously escaped a fair amount of scrutiny, and she needs to surmount that. It's actually a good way to practice for the debate, because you don't want to come into the debate without having done an interview, because then that becomes essentially an interview itself of her. And I'm not sure she wants that to be the focus of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see her doing interviews in advance of the September 10th debate.
And do you think she can keep the excitement going, the momentum behind her being powered by this sort of joyful feeling amongst her supporters? Because I wonder how much of that joy was as much that she was the candidate as that Joe Biden wasn't anymore.
That is part of it, and there is, this bounce has been expected. Most people on both sides, frankly, were predicting that she would emerge from the conventions with a lead. I think the lead is approximately 4% nationwide right now.
Mm.
I think one thing President Trump needs to assess and will assess is, can he win? And some people speculate if he decided he couldn't win, he wouldn't want to get beaten, and they could do a switcheroo like they accuse the Democrats of doing. Although that's frankly a long shot, but that's among the X factors. Like, we don't know what X factors might emerge over the next 2 months, whether it's the debate itself or whether it's some international issue which emerges and shakes things up in unexpected ways.
Well, and of course, if Trump and the Republicans lose, we pretty much know that his voters will say that he won. Do you think much mental energy is being spent by the Democrats at the moment preparing their strategy in response to that, if they win but are being told they haven't?
I don't think so. In part because he's, unlike last time, he's not in office at this time. So the practical effect of that will be more limited. I'm sure both sides are gearing up for challenges because I was involved in 2000. I was working for Al Gore, and that of course became a litigation situation with a very close race in Florida, and so you could end up with something like that if this ends up being a very close race. So there could be a genuine debate over who won and who lost. Let's hope that doesn't happen, because 2000 was a very difficult situation for the country.
Okay, Jim Kennedy, former Clinton advisor, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks. Take care.
Great to speak to you.